Grace and peace to you and welcome to worship for Sunday, September the 18th, 2022, from Charleswood United Church in Winnipeg. My name is Michael Wilson. Working in his remote studio location this week is Benjamin, and it is our great pleasure to offer you this time of prayer, praise, and reflection. I remind us that Charleswood United Church is on Treaty 1 land, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, and Dene people, and is the homeland of the Métis Nation. We are reminded that we are a community working towards right relations and reconciliation. I sent a short announcement by email out this week to have people mark October 2nd. Now, in and of itself, there's nothing special about October 2nd, except a few things have kind of come together to have us look towards October 2nd with some excitement and anticipation. It's going to be the date of our fall farmers market, a return from the healing farm for Yazidi refugees so that we can buy some of the fall produce that we use in anticipation of Thanksgiving and Halloween. That means the pumpkins will be there. It is also a day in which we are going to relaunch Hebrews Cafe. For those of you unfamiliar with Charleswood's life, Hebrews Cafe is the name we give our coffee time after church. It has been suspended for 2.5 years, but October 2nd, the volunteers are ready to go. The coffee has been purchased. We're going to celebrate that with a little bit of sweets to go along with it, and a mini celebration, if you will, of our centennial, which is going on all year, but we haven't had a lot of opportunities to gather around tables in celebration of that. So every week, you are welcome, you are invited, you will experience a warm reception if you come to Charleswood, but have an eye for October 2nd. There's a lot going on as we slowly build back and come back to the fullness of our life together. We're delighted that you have joined us for worship. We hope and pray that it will be a time of blessing for you. Let us come before God and worship together.
To sing Alleluia, praise to our servant King, Alleluia, let all with heart and voice, saved by God's gracious choice, now in this place rejoice, sky, Alleluia. Christ calls his people friends, the helpless he defends. Our love that never ends, Alleluia. Praise yet our Christ again, strain, Alleluia. The whole creation roar, let all God's love adore, singing forevermore, Alleluia.
A reading is from the Gospel of Luke in chapter 16. Beginning at verse 1, let us listen for the gospel of Christ. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, "What is this that I hear about you? Give me an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer." Then the manager said to himself, "What will I do? Now that my master is taking the position away from me, I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their houses." So summoning the master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, "And how much do you owe?" He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, "Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a little is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can have two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Amen. Thanks be to God.
Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling for you and for me. See on the portals he's waiting and watching, watching for you and for me. Come home, come home. You who are weary, come home. Come home, come home. You who are weary, come home. Why should we tarry when Jesus is pleading, pleading for you and for me? Why should we linger and heed not his mercies, mercies for you and for me? Come home, come home. You who are weary, come home. Come home, come home. You who are weary, come home. Oh, for the wonderful love he has promised, promised for you and for me. Lord, we have sinned, he has mercy and pardon, pardon for you and for me. Come home, come You who are weary, come home.
I love my non-church going friends. I'm sure you have some. Primarily, I love my non-church going friends because they're my friends, and you love your friends. But I also love my non-church going friends because in some ways they keep me humble, and they make me question some of the things that I take for granted. I had a recent conversation with one such friend. And I'm not sure how the conversation got to it, but we were talking about the relationship between the congregation and the things that I have to do as a minister, and this organization to whom we belong, the United Church of Canada. And my friend asks me, well, how much money do you get from the United Church of Canada? Meaning, surely, if you're part of a large organization, they must give you money to be an outlet, to conduct your ministry, to carry on in their name. And I explained to him, it's actually the opposite way around. We have to raise all the money that we need to operate and carry out this mission and ministry, and we need to support the United Church of Canada, its various activities, and send money to them. He thought this very strange. Most of that can be attributed to the fact that he is not part of a church and really doesn't get how churches operate or how it may relate to its denomination. And more than that, he's a professional, and he works in a place where most of the funding that supports his work comes from elsewhere, comes from above, comes from government in that particular case. I have another non-church going friend who once asked me how much money we got from the government to operate, to be present in our community and do the things that we do. And of course, the answer to that is not at all. I've mentioned these assumptions and misunderstandings, how it is we relate to money, because I'm about to talk about a parable of Jesus that ends with the proverb, you cannot serve God and money. Some translations are, you cannot serve God and wealth. If you were ever familiar with the King James Version of the Bible, you may remember this proverb in its old language, you cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon is a delightful word. It's an ancient word. It comes from Hebrew through Aramaic, which was the spoken language of Jesus, and found its way more or less untouched into English. When we read in the King James Version, you cannot serve God and mammon, we're reading this old word that was literally translated as riches, but had a connotation. It was riches that tempted, riches that worked within you to kind of draw you away from the things that matter most, riches that compromised you. That's all contained in that word mammon. We don't use it elsewhere in English, and so it's helpful to use the word money or wealth. But I have to preach on this parable, this teaching of Jesus that ends with this proverb, as one who, comes to you many times a year to remind you of your financial commitments and tries to, as best as we are able, raise money for many purposes related to the life and work of our church. And I do so as somebody who, in biblical understanding, has money. I am comfortable. I have money that I can give away. I have to then question, what is it about my faith that that causes me to receive instruction about how I should use this money that I have been given? It is utterly disingenuous for me to preach on this parable and assume the position of the poor, that I'm the faithful and I've got all my stuff together when it comes to how to relate to money, because none of that is true. What I love about this parable, this peculiar parable, I actually think it's almost a humorous parable. It's often dubbed the parable of the dishonest manager. Why is it Jesus is teaching about someone who is dishonest? Can't we get a little bit more Good Samaritan in here? But the parable of the dishonest manager assumes that there is money, assumes that there is wealth, assumes that someone who is listening to the teachings of Jesus, someone who is reading the Gospel of Luke, is in a position to question, what should I do with the wealth that I have? How do I address the question in my heart of mammon? And so it is, we will look into that, and we will do so remembering the proverb that comes at the end. Maybe we'll also do so that there's a connection to faith and wealth or material goods that runs throughout the Gospel of Luke. So dominant a theme that it exists even outside the teachings of Jesus. In Luke, at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, we read the account of the ministry of John the Baptist, the most influential person in the life of Jesus, without a doubt. And before John addresses Jesus, before Jesus is on the scene, Luke tells us about the ministry of John in and of itself, how he was in the Jordan preaching a baptism of repentance, and how people from Jerusalem would come to him. And they would ask the question, what are we to do? What is the action that accompanies repentance? A word that means turn around, to turn away from sin, to begin anew. What is the action that accompanies the deeper and more faithful life? And you may remember it from the stories that are told. The very first thing John says is, if you have 2 shirts, share it with the person who has none. Jesus is addressing his disciples, the people who have been present with him, after some series of exchanges with Pharisees and scribes, those opponents of Jesus who seek to undermine him and contradict him. And he is most certainly having this group of authorities in mind, this group of influential and affluent people in mind, as he says to his disciples. There was a dishonest manager. A man with a rich estate was told that the person who was in charge of his goods was squandering his property. Within the parable, there's no question that that's a fair accusation. The dishonest manager doesn't dispute it. The owner of the estate calls the manager in, and he asks him to present an accounting, turn over the books, because you can't be my manager anymore. He is going to be fired. And so it's with that setting, in the brief window of time that exists between losing his job and being confronted by the manager with his crimes, that the dishonest manager thinks to himself, what am I going to do? I am too weak to dig, and I am too proud to beg. I know what I'll do. As he runs down the list of options and having eliminated the first 2, I know what I'll do, so that when I am dismissed, again, the parable puts in the mouth of the dishonest manager an understanding that he's going to lose his job. That's not, it's staying in employ is not on the table. And so he calls in the debtors of the owner of the estate. And he calls in the first one. They come in one at a time, and he says, how much do you owe us? How much do you owe my master? How much do you owe the estate? And the first one says, well, I'm in debt for 100 jars of olive oil. And the dishonest manager, who was going to lose his job anyway, says, I'll tell you what, you make it 50. If you can do it quick, if you can write it out right away, make it 50, we'll be good. All square. And we presume that it is done. Then he calls in another debtor. And he says, how much do you owe the estate, my master's estate? And he says, 100 measures of wheat. And the manager says, I'll tell you what, make it 80. If you can make it 80, we'll just forget the rest and off we go. And again, we presume that the deal that was offered was accepted. And Jesus kind of winds up the parable by saying that the owner of the estate was so impressed by the manager, not to give him his job back, he's still going to be fired, but to recognize that in this matter, he had done the only thing that he could do, which was to ingratiate himself with someone else, so that when he loses his job, which was inevitable, there would be people out there who thought well of him. People out there you might even call a friend. Someone for the dishonest manager to turn to when he was going to have nowhere else to go. I told you it's a peculiar parable. The hero of the story is one who is dishonest. Scholars actually go to some length to try and figure out if he continued to be dishonest when offering the cut deal on olive oil and wheat, or if he was just eliminating his commission or what was owed to him and therefore all of a sudden changed his stripes. I'm comfortable with the idea that he was dishonest even in that. Because as we know, the teaching ends with this saying of Jesus, this proverb, you cannot serve God and money. And in leading us towards that conclusion, Jesus is offering a little obscure and again, maybe a little humorous way of putting things in proportion. If I can offer what I think Jesus is saying here, he's saying, it's just money. It's temporary, it's material, it's of the earth. It's just money. But the way we relate to one another, the relationships that we have, the quality and nature of our relationships, well, that's eternal. That matters. In the verses that follow the parable, Jesus seems to contrast what some translations call dishonest wealth or dishonest money with true riches. He's lifting up for his disciples the things that matter most. Money and wealth exists, but they exist to serve the true riches, the relationships. Or I need to put this back into biblical language. You can have either the love of money, or you can live for the love of God and the love of neighbor. Right? The greatest commandment, after all, is to love God and love your neighbor with equal passion. Do we use the things that we have to lift up and venerate the love of money? Or do we use those same things because they exist and we need them to elevate the love of God and neighbor where we find our true life? I actually don't have to spend any time convincing you that most of the time, in most places, maybe even in most people, the love of money trumps the love of God. I heard an interview this past week on the radio. The mayor of Winnipeg, Brian Bowman, is not seeking re-election this fall, and therefore is coming to the end of 2 terms, 8 years in service to our city. And the interviewer asked him a number of good questions, the last of which was, because you're not running for re-election, would you admit to anything that you regret, or do you have any regrets? And to his great credit, Mayor Bowman said that he regretted he didn't get further on the issue of homelessness. And as he offered some commentary on that idea that this was an issue that he wished more could have been accomplished, he said the thing that we all know to be true. How could there be homelessness in our city and many cities, if not all cities, in a country that has such great wealth? The resources exist, but it doesn't demand the attention, it doesn't get the attraction, it doesn't get the momentum that so many other things do. You know, every day I drive to work and I drive past Assiniboine Park and I see the now completed building at the south end near Park Boulevard. Private donations were offered in excess of $100 million to build. It is beautiful and it adds to the park. I understand that. But to get that kind of momentum behind the efforts to end homelessness is next to impossible. Small projects happen. There's a family in Winnipeg who have established a charity called Home First Winnipeg. They're building 47 micro-suite units in a 3-story building in Winnipeg's Centennial District. It's a phenomenal effort. So too, the proposed ideas to make community housing possible in the Main and Higgins neighborhood. These efforts show there is some light at the end of the tunnel. There's some people who want to see resolution, but to get our wealth, including my own, working towards these noble goals is exceedingly difficult. And it always has been. There's a bit of an apocryphal story about John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, who was known to frequently preach about money. And the story goes that he was in Scotland and he was preaching, and he taught the thing that he always taught. He said, about money, you should make all you can, and you should save all that you can, and that you should give away all that you can. And a Scotsman sitting in the front row upon hearing the 3rd line of this sermon said, why did you have to go and ruin a perfectly good sermon? You cannot serve God and money, Jesus teaches, God and wealth, God and mammon, if you're familiar with that ancient term, because they don't compare. One is a tool that may be used, if we choose, for the service of the other. One is almost to be dismissed. It is, after all, money, and someday it's going to go away. The love of God and the love of neighbor is eternal. The love of God and love of neighbor is where we find our life. The love of God and the love of neighbor, the relationships we have, the way we use the resources that we have to nurture those relationships, to build new relationships, to create new relationships, is the place of our life. It's where our heart will find its greatest reward. It is where we will know we are closest to the one, to the Spirit who calls us, who created us, who made us in that image. We give thanks to God for the lessons that are difficult, because in working our way through them, we discover the greatest of blessing, the blessing of companionship with the one who loves us without condition. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Your hand, O God, has guided your flock from age to age. The wondrous tale is written, full clear on every page. Our forebears owned your goodness, and we their deeds record. And both to this bear witness, one church, one faith, one Lord. Your heralds brought glad tidings, to greatest as to least. They bade them rise and hasten to share the heavenly feast. And this was all their teaching in every deed and word, to all alike proclaiming one church, one faith, one Lord. Through many days of darkness, through many scenes of strife, the faithful few fought bravely to guard your people's life. Their gospel of redemption, sin pardoned, earth restored, was all in this enfolded, one church, one faith, one Lord. And we be faithless, shall hearts fail, hands hang down, shall we evade the conflict and cast away our crown? Not so in God's deep counsel, some better thing is stored. We will maintain unflinching, one church, one faith, one Lord. Your mercy will not fail us, nor leave your work undone. With your right hand to help us, the victory shall be won. And then by earth and heaven your name shall be adored. And this shall be our anthem, one church, one faith, one Lord.
Let us unite our hearts and minds together in prayer. Let us pray. Creating and generous Spirit, when all had been accomplished at the dawn of time, you looked around the perfect garden you had sown and invited your people, made in your image, to be its steward. From that moment forward, it has been our blessing to see your hand in every sunrise, to hear your voice in every bird's song, and to feel your kiss in every breeze. We praise you for blessing us with so great a gift, even the gift of our own being, and we wish to return proper thanks to you. We thank you for the faith you have shown to us by entrusting us with the goodness of creation. Caretaking Spirit, you have made us stewards of one another's well-being, and we thank you for not leaving us to our own device and invention. You have called us into community precisely to share the gifts with which you bless us. We praise you for the calling to be stewards of the common good. We thank you, Holy One, for the service that has been offered and the duty that has been rendered and the humility that has been extended through the life and reign of Queen Elizabeth II. As that life is entrusted to your eternal care, we pray for wisdom to discern what should be held and honored from the past and what should be renewed and reborn for the future. Humbly we pray for the community of James Smith Cree Nation, who remain grief-stricken following the horror visited upon them. Such a sudden and violent impact on a community is nearly impossible to comprehend. Let your people be sustained by the prayer and witness of those around them until such time as the light in their spirits may shine again. We pray for the brokenhearted in our communities and among our circle of friends. We pray for the ministry extended to the sorrowful, the lonely, the ailing. We pray for a young man whose addictions have led him to the streets. Gracious God, you met us in Jesus Christ on our terms, the Word made flesh. Help us to recognize you in the neighbors we meet and receive them and welcome them as you would. These things we ask in the name of the one who has made it possible to approach you in prayer with confidence and hope, Jesus Christ, who still teaches disciples to pray together by saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Friends, thank you for joining us. May you know God's presence and blessing in the week that is to come. For now, be well, be safe, and be hopeful. Amen.